Ladies and gentlemen, the American Jury and Bulldog Nation, welcome to another segment of Eric Deters, the Law. And I hope that you find these very educational. As I always like to remind you, these are educational. This isn't legal advice. This is educational. I'm a retired attorney. I don't lose my knowledge. I have vast knowledge. I practice law in nearly every single area of the law over a 25-year period. So I know a little bit about lots of areas of the law. Now, when I talk about business law, I'm talking about the broad overview of business law. For example, each of your individual industries has its own law, like, for example, farming. That's a different type of law. And we'll do a video about that soon. Agriculture. Whether it's restaurants have their own. So what I'm about ready to talk to you about has to do with structure that would apply to any type of a business. Let's begin with sole proprietorship. A sole proprietorship is just you doing business. You don't create any type of entity at all. You just are operating under your name or whatever name that you use, Social Security, your Social Security number. You're going to pay taxes on it just like you do for yourself. Now, what I always recommended for people that have a really small, like you're a one-man show, you're going to start doing consulting work. You're going to just do something out of your home, out of your barn. The best thing to do generally is do a sole proprietorship until you know you're going to, get it rolling. You get it rolling, you might want to change. But by the way, something also about names is you need to register your name either in a trademark office where you actually own that name against the whole world, or for a state where you register that name that you're going to use. For example, I can be Eric Deters doing business as Deters Chicken Farm, and I can register Deters Chicken Farm with the state, so I can only use that. So that's something that you need to remember. You can protect the name you want to use. Partnerships. Partnerships are what two people coming together, and always remember this, what I talked about in contract law. You can agree to whatever two people can agree to. You can agree to anything. Josh Wentz and I can agree to be partners on, I don't know, the canisters are in this place that we're going to sell. I mean, as long as it's not illegal. And partnerships usually have a partnership agreement. And that partnership agreement outlines who owns what percentage of the partnership, what's each of the partners' responsibilities are, what the partnership game plan is, how they're going to function, and how they're going to operate. There's all kinds of different partnerships. The main partnerships are limited partnerships. They're created for a very specific reason. Josh Wentz and I create a partnership where we are going to sell sunglasses outside of this building, and that's the only thing we're going to do. But they can be limited in other ways too, time frames. Also, general partnership. A general partnership is more expansive. It can just be a partnership, and we're going to do business, whatever kind of business that we can do. It's very important for you to understand that these partnerships will be taxed as a separate entity, usually the money flowing. One bad thing about a partnership and a sole proprietorship is it doesn't protect you from liability outside the ordinary course of things. So, for example, if you get sued because you screwed up an order, like let's say Josh and I start, this is funny, let's say he and I start selling sunglasses. Remember that Jerk, the movie with Steve Martin, where he had that thing that he invented and he made all the money, and then he caused everybody to get cross-eyed and he went busted? Well, if he was a partnership or a sole proprietorship, he personally is busted. So these partnerships do not protect you from liability. Now, I'm old-fashioned. I love the good old-fashioned, regular old corporation. And I'm going to talk to you more about corporations in a minute, but I just want you incorporate by the state that you're in and what state you choose to be in. And there's a little simple process you can incorporate real quick and real easy. If you do business in that corporation can protect you from individual liability. So, for example, if we're incorporated and somebody, our sunglasses made everybody cross-eyed, like in the Jerk, we would be protected unless they could show something about piercing the corporate veil. Now, we'll talk about that too in a minute. All right, limited liability companies. These got really sexy in the last 20 or 30 years. It's kind of a hybrid between a partnership where you kind of have a limited liability corporation. It's a partnership. They're called LLCs. You can take on investors, of course. By the way, you can take on investors whether and I'm going to talk about it more in a minute, whether you're a partner, sole proprietorship, corporation, or a limited liability company. But I think an old-fashioned corporation is just as good as a limited liability corporation. It can protect you from some liability. Limited liability corporation. All right, trusts. Trusts are created. You can actually do business under a trust. Your trust that you create, and we're going to cover that in a separate video. You have nonprofits. Okay. Believe it or not, some of the largest corporations are nonprofits like hospitals. All a nonprofit is a corporation that takes a nonprofit status, 501c, so forth and so on. Now let's dig into corporations a little bit. Because I think this is the most prevalent thing in our society, that you've got these corporations, big, medium, and small. A corporation is owned by its shareholders. By the way, something about a limited liability corporation is they limit how many owners you can have. Shareholders, you can have as many shareholders as you want as long as you're a C corporation. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But shareholders own the company. Directors manage the big picture of the companies. Shareholders elect directors. All right. Directors are the ones, you've heard about this, the board of directors. The board of directors guide the general policy of the company. For example, I would tell you that the board of directors are the ones at the big three motor companies, auto companies right now in Detroit. Those board of directors are the ones that are making the decision whether or not to settle the strike or not. They're the big picture guys. The directors elect the officers, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. You can have as many officers as you want, but they elect the officers who run the day-to-day operations. Officers answer to directors. Directors answer to the shareholders. You have these meetings, whether it's a directors meeting, shareholders meetings, you have minutes, and you keep the minutes of these meetings. Those are very important to keep the record. You have to have at least one annual shareholders meeting. That's common. All right. Directors usually meet more often. In the corporation that I was involved with for 30 years, the Deters Company and Snappy Tomato Pizza Company, we would have an annual shareholders meeting that was kind of contrived because, we were the only shareholders, my dad and I. And then we would have a monthly board meeting. So that's the way that's pretty common for smaller corporations. Okay. This is very important. How do you get taxed? You can make an election under what's called subchapter S of the IRS code to where your corporation is taxed as if you're an individual or partnerships. That's very common for smaller corporations. You're limited in some of the ownership of your corporation. For example, if you elect subchapter S, a corporation cannot own any part of your stock. A C corp is what they call, which is the traditional corporation where you don't do the subchapter S election. That corporation pays taxes, everything, does your own separate tax return, and distributes money if need be. The bylaws are what the directors implement and operate under. The corporate bylaws. Some things I'm going to add to my little outline here on corporations is this. Corporations, when they're like a big corporation, let's say a corporation like Apple, dividends are what's paid to the shareholders for owning that stock. It's called dividends. So you've heard that word before, dividends, and that's important. Publicly traded corporation is a corporation that's gone public. The big guys, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange. They're publicly traded where the marketplace for that stock is in public. If it's a small corporation, it's not out there for the public. Some more things. Owners of corporations and partnerships as well, you can have what's called buy-sell agreements, where you have agreements between yourself that you have to first a right of first refusal to sell to your partner because you don't want to get sold. Like, for example, if I own a partnership with Josh Wentz, I don't want Josh Wentz to sell his half of the company to his grumpy uncle Joe. You know, I don't want grumpy Uncle Joe. So I restrict who he can sell his stock to so I don't get waylaid. By the way, I'm going to forget some topics here, but I want to cover the gist of them. Okay, the next topic is very important. Fiduciary duties. The shareholders expect the board of directors to create, maintain shareholder value, protect their interests. The directors expect the officers to do the same. Folks, this is why you're getting these lawsuits like Budweiser. The board of directors and these officers breach their fiduciary duty to the shareholders big time with what they did. I mean, that's just awful. Insider trading is a form of a breach of fiduciary duty. Lots of litigation. Most of the litigation in business comes from breaches of contract and breaches of these fiduciary duties that the directors have. By the way, the directors have a duty to each other. The directors have a duty to the officers to the directors, to the shareholders. You have a fiduciary duty. What's that fiduciary duty? To perform your job to the best of your ability for the best interest of the shareholders. It's a very broad duty. Shareholder lawsuits, that's when the shareholders get pissed off at what the directors have done. For example, mergers. You have something in big law firms called acquisitions and mergers. They focus on acquisitions and mergers, corporations buying corporations. Sometimes you get these lawsuits to where a corporation does not sell for a certain price. The shareholder says, wait a minute, you breached your fiduciary duty. We should have sold for that price. Or sometimes, hey, you sold at too low of a price. There's a lot of litigation going on. By the way, as I've mentioned before, there's more litigation going on with business versus business than there is against people for personal injury. Liability insurance. This is really important, especially if you're a small little company. Why? That liability insurance protects you from bankruptcy if something goes wrong. For example, if we're manufacturing sunglasses, Josh and I, we can purchase insurance in case somebody goes cross-eyed to protect us. Setting up any of these entities, especially a partnership or corporation, one of the first things you want to do is get a tax ID number. When you open up a bank account in that entity's name, they're going to want a tax ID number. That's like the social security number for your business. It's really important. That will follow you all the way through. Then you've got state numbers that you got to get set up. Just think about it. If you're going to have payroll, you got payroll you got to deal with. You've got workers' compensation, so forth and so on. There's just a lot. And I'm going to talk about how you protect yourself in a minute. Then you got taxes. These entities all got to pay taxes. That also means they get to deduct things. They get to depreciate things. One of the most important things that you can do when you start a business is get on board right away a good CPA or accountant and an attorney. If you're lucky, you can get both. Like Bob Winter, who I work with a lot at the law firm, Bob Winter is an accountant and a CPA. But the bottom line is you want somebody that can help you and a good bookkeeper. A bookkeeper is somebody that does that daily, because I'm telling you right now, folks, I've seen so many businesses fail because the structure's not set up properly. All right, written agreements and contracts. If you're in business, you're going to have a lot of written agreements and contracts, and that's why you need a lawyer to review these. My cousin Josh, who's a builder, he always sends me everything to review. I don't charge him. It's not practicing law. He's my cousin. I'm giving him free advice as my cousin. He sends me all the contracts that he's asked to sign. He sends them over to me. Just think, if you're a builder, there's all kinds of written agreements, contracts, real estate contracts, on and on and on. You got to just make sure you do everything you need to do. Banks and loans. These entities can always borrow money and get loans. However, usually, unless your company's an ongoing enterprise, they're always going to want to make you sign personally guarantee. That's very common. Speaking of banks and loans, there's two ways to raise money generally for your business. Borrowing money from a bank. You fund fully through borrowing the money. Or equity. You sell interest in your partnership and your corporation. Let's say Josh and I start selling those sunglasses and they're doing really well, but we need to raise $100,000 to expand our operations. We asked Sabrina Kane for $50,000 and Jamie Spindley for $50,000, and we decide to sell them 20% interest in our company for $50,000, $20,000 each. So Josh and I have 60%. They each have 20%. That's called equity. So you can raise money through equity as well. What else do we got covered here? Business plan. Could have put this in the beginning, and it's this. Before you start a business, you got to have a written business plan. Somebody who wants to start their own business emailed me their business plan yesterday, asked me to take a look at it, and I'm going to look at it. It's a storage business. Intellectual property. This is trademarks, copyrights, everything else. If your business is based upon an invention, a trademark, all that type of thing, you need to get it protected. I use and I highly recommend Chris Mackey. Chris Mackey does a great job down in Newport, Kentucky. Yes, he is the husband of Tricia Mackey. Marketing and branding. Once again, that intellectual property. You start forming. Very important that you have marketing, branding, advertising. These are all, I'm getting off the law, more pragmatic, but these are all important to your new business. Key employees. These are where you might want to have an employment contract so they can't leave, covenant not to compete, non-disclosure agreements. Those are very important. Or life insurance on a key employee. Last but not least, I'm going to cover workers' comp. If you are a labor extensive, like I find it hysterical that like at Deters Law or Deters Consulting, workers' comp, nobody gets hurt, right? But you got to have workers' comp if you're in the construction business, right? So you got to make sure you cover insurance is a big issue. Just think what I just covered, and I'm going to close with this. Think of what I just covered, the intricacies of this, all of this process, and it isn't even making your product, selling your product, the daily work that you got to do. The reason why I bring this up is people who go out and try to start their own business should be heralded. They should be praised. Government should get off their backs, tax and regulations, because small business is the backbone of this country. But I just marvel at people think that it's easy. It's not easy. It's never easy. Now, certainly some people fall into it and luck out, like they start a business and they got a gigantic contract and boom. I met this guy once in litigation. I actually sued him, but we became friends. He actually did the installs for Home Depot for a certain part of their business, and now does that install for that type of work for like all the Home Depots in the Midwest. I mean, I'm like, wow. In other words, if you call Home Depot for X, Y, Z, they refer you to this guy. I mean, just imagine. But you know what? A lot of hard work to get to that position. But, there's a lot of luck. Sometimes you can luck out and be filthy rich like that. Your idea is so hot, boom. But generally, it's nothing but hard work. This is the Bulldog. Every dog has their day. Again, if you've got a business law question, you can text me or email me. I'll give you free advice so it's not the unauthorized practice of law.